Let's do this. Welcome, Philippe. I'm glad we're having this conversation. This will be fun.
Already. Yeah, the conversation always starts before the recording starts.
That's right. That's right.
Classic.
Well, I thought we were going to sort of, I wasn't sure. I thought we'd have like a 15-minute, here's what we're going to talk about. But I think you and I launched pretty easily into just, here's the things, right? Yep. So mostly what inspired, and I'm also having a series of, I'm going to call them evolutionary conversations, just about like, whenever somebody talks about evolution or about stages, or I'm deeply interested. And you posted something a while back about, stages of responsibility, which I thought was a very diplomatic way of putting, that bottom stage. It was a very kind way to phrase it. Because I was like, well, there's no responsibility there. Like I would read, like I think the stages were solid. Everything you said is accurate. Like those are the stages. And then I was just, splitting hairs over labeling. So at first I think it's important, and I want to have a conversation with you about that. And also just this, the consent conversation and responsibility, and also just all of the strange victimhood stuff that's going on in our culture right now. And that's not to say there aren't true, I like to distinguish between victims and victimhood. Like you can be a victim of a horrible thing. And then the question is, what happens next? And then there's some people who aren't victims at all who are engaged in victimhood. So with all of that, we started just a few minutes ago by talking about this idea that some woman, and I don't remember who she was. I do remember it was Anya who shared it. One of the things she said it was engaged in, toxic spirituality was what I consider one of the most important things to do, which is to just acknowledge that your life is the sum total of your choices. And I mean that not like I accomplished this thing, that was all me. I mean it more like, yeah, I really need to look at my choices, because if I'm getting less than optimal results, or if I'm in a pickle, it's not because of circumstance or things outside of myself, it's because I made those choices.
Yeah. Can I jump in?
Please, yeah, go for it.
So,
by the way, for those watching, he and I will talk over each other. We don't care.
Yeah, I try to be polite here. Otherwise, I would have just jumped in. But we had not established that particular kind of agreement. So, my definition of victimhood is when something happens to you that was against your consent. Okay, so there's obviously different degrees of it, So I could jump in on top of you, and you could say, "Well, I didn't consent to that." That doesn't necessarily make you a victim, but it puts you it puts you in the place of, okay, I didn't consent to that, if that's the case for you. So it is true that for some people, and I think that's what you meant when you said there are victims, that some people have things happen to them that either is something that happens in their reality that's random, exactly, or it is related to somebody else's choice or needs or desires or boundaries that basically causes the other person to feel like they were not a choice anymore. And it's that loss of choice, that loss of freedom in that moment that can reverberate moving forward.
And let me just give an example, and also by the way, for those of you who think that talking over somebody is some sort of disrespect, just interpret it as Philippe and I are so excited about the ideas,
for sure,
that we're just like full of excitement. So that's the way to interpret. And by the way, most of my friendships are this way because they're all brilliant people, and so we're constantly like Michael Lewis and I, that we've had hour-long conversations where we never finish a thought.
Yeah, we're like two puppies playing in the field.
Yeah, totally. Or like we used to talk about, like, it's like an oak leaf. Like we talk about this, and then it branches off here, and then and then it just, there's so many different tangents we could go on. But so for me, victimhood is where you then want social capital as a result of the thing that happened to you, and you use it for comfort, and it feels like, people who are really developed, it feels off. There's something I'm going to use a technical term, icky about it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean by victimhood. Now,
Yeah.
in terms of an example of like what I mean by like a random, like I had a buddy of mine who he got mugged, and he was crossing the street in the middle of, like not the middle of the night, like 11 o'clock at night. He was headed home. Super not flashy guy, like sweet guy, always low key. He got beat up and mugged. Now he had virtually nothing on him, so it wasn't really, like they weren't even getting anything. He didn't have a car. I don't even think like they took his wallet, but he didn't have any money in it, like, and they took like he had like an old Android on him that he had just, picked up for a friend to repair.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really all he had on him. But, and so that's, victim. But then what do you do with it? Do you like, do you start talking about how dangerous the city is, or do you go take a self-defense class?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's the difference between a victim and victimhood. Victimhood is like, So,
so what if, I kind of like the word victimhood because it's got the word hood in it. So what if when something happens to you, you experience a loss of choice or a loss of sense of choice, because maybe you had no choice in the first place, but you never actually experienced it. And you experience that loss of choice beyond your ability to actually choose it. Because you could choose to not have as much choice. I mean, some people become parents that way. They know that they're going to lose choice,
right,
in a great variety of ways, or they have a
and
good sense of it.
all parents lose choice, by the way. God bless you for doing it, so I don't have to.
Well, we lose choice in order to give more choice, in order to create a human being that has choice. So I mean, it's like being in partnership, there's a loss of choice in some ways, and it also is empowering in other ways. Okay, having said that, what if when you experience that loss of choice that you didn't choose, that's what that's what that's what the experience of being a victim is. There's high degrees of that, such as abuse and trauma. And you could feel like you're a victim of the circumstances, which is sort of the random piece, or you could be a victim of people. And you can always point at something or nothing or God or the universe as a way of saying, okay, it wasn't my fault. All right. Yeah. Because you're already in a place of having lost choice. So it's difficult to say, well, I chose that. Okay. So what if victimhood is the sort of domain that you get thrown into of people who have lost those choices? And it's a very specific experience. You get thrown into that hood, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you see everything from that place of having lost choice, which is a disempowered place, but that's the place where you might end up. And it's almost like you're hypnotized to believe that you have less choice than you did before, and the trauma either in your body or in your experience kind of keeps you there. And that would be my experience of being stuck in a drama triangle.
Well, all right. Well, that's a drama triangle, a whole other, like, that's part of the oak leaf. So here's part of my experience. So all of that is choice. Mindset's always choice. And even
that's right.
So I spent 30 adult years in San Francisco. Never once felt in danger. And I walked in the middle of the night, like really in the middle, like 2, 3, 4 a.m. in every neighborhood. Worst places. Well, not there's one neighborhood I didn't walk. Mostly, it's near Petro Hill. You know the one I'm talking about?
Yep.
I forget what it's called. Anyway, okay. But middle of Tenderloin, middle of the night, and a lot of people say, "Well, sure, but you're 200 pounds and 6 feet tall," and I'm like, "Well, yeah." And I was trained as a martial artist from the age of 4. And then while I couldn't get into a fight now, like I would just hurt myself because I haven't practiced for 35 years, I still have the awareness. And so I see something weird, I actually walk in the middle of the street where nobody can sneak up on me or jump me. Like I just move into the light. And so I'm just hyper aware. So, I don't know what the circumstances are, with my buddy who got mugged. But and I don't think people realize that that's a choice. It's like, oh, I'll just walk in the middle of the street. You get out of the way for traffic. But so I think I think that there's a lot of people who claim they didn't have choice when they did. And the idea that you then enter this loop of, oh, well, look how much little choice I have,
Yep.
is a mindset choice, and that is a choice. And
Well,
so the
I mean,
question is,
it's a choice only when it is. Until that point, you might not know that it's a choice, right? So, and somebody coming along and says that's a choice, and which could mean a version of acceptance is required in order to make that choice. You know, it might sound like it's your fault, and that's the difference between choice and fault
right.
that people don't understand.
Yeah. So I finally distinguish, because landmark education says it all the time, that like fault and
Yeah.
blame are separate conversation with responsibility. Responsibility is your access to choice and power, which I agree with.
Yeah.
Which I agree with. But they then don't define what the difference is. They don't or distinguish, I should say. They don't then distinguish what the difference is. And for me,
Yeah.
the difference is very easy to distinguish. One is about the past, and then, which is fault and blame. Like, whose fault is it? Who can I hold? It's all past looking.
Yeah.
Choice is, and responsibility is, what would I do differently in the future?
That's right.
It has nothing to do with like who's at fault, or who could I blame, or what did I do? Even what did I do wrong? It's still a past orientation. But what will I do differently again in the future? What other choice can I make in the future? And it has no interest in guilt or blame or shaming anybody about it, because because that's a low level ego game, in my opinion. If you're trying to do it to somebody else, you're trying to gain power over them, and it is a kind of emotional force, I think.
Yep.
And if you're doing it to yourself, well, that's just not useful, because you're beating yourself up for what. You still have to move through that to go, okay, now you still have to get through that process to go, okay, what would I do differently in the future? And if you could just skip all the bullshit and go right to what would I do differently in the future,
That's right.
and to me, that is the reason it's access to choice and power. Now,
Yep.
for somebody with low self-esteem, oh my gosh, it's like trying
That's
to
it.
squat 300 pounds with a hernia already.
That's right.
So, and they can't
But
handle
low
it.
self-esteem is it real, or is it an illusion?
What?
Is low self-esteem real, or is it an illusion? If you can hypnotize someone who has low self-esteem to have high self-esteem, is it
You
real,
can't.
or is it an illusion?
You can't hypnotize. It's about stages of ego development. You can't trance someone
Okay.
into having. So, first of all, let's just define self-esteem. And
Yeah.
this is partly Dr. Nathaniel Brennan, but also the state of California in the 90s created a study, whatever, state of California, their psychology, whatever thing. I don't know what board it was, but they studied it and came to this pretty much almost exact language as him. But it's knowledge of your competence in any given
Okay.
to handle life. And so
Right.
if you,
Right.
and it's knowledge, not like a belief or an affirmation, but you need
Got
historical
it.
references. So
Right.
I
Right. You
know,
need the experience.
correct. And then the second part is self-acceptance, which is really just believing that you're worthy of good things. That part is belief.
Right. Right.
And so those two, and it really is a matter of accepting it, whether you want to think, well, we're all a child of God, or we're a manifestation, we're a hologram of the universe, or, a manifestation of the divine, whatever you want. That's really just a matter of accepting that you're worthy of receiving. But the first part, that your knowledge of your competence, I mean, if I can say I can walk in the middle of the street, down a street, dark street, because I've done it so many times, I'm like, I'll be fine.
Yeah. Right.
Or I get myself into a tricky financial situation and go, well, I know I can make money at any turn because of what I do for a living, if I just do certain things. Why? Because I have done that so many times. And so that's knowledge of my competence. That gives you a certain quiet confidence that you can handle anything.
Yep.
So you're not, so I don't think high self-esteem is I think a lot of people just, they have a misunderstanding about what self-esteem is. And if you don't have like the direct experience of being competent at a thing, especially just your ability to handle whatever life throws at you, then you can't possibly have high self-esteem. You can feel good about yourself.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're talking about self-efficacy.
Correct.
Yeah,
Self-efficacy and
just one
self-respect are the
aspect.
two. Self-efficacy and self-respect are the two primary, and then everything branches off from there.
Well, self-worth is the third one.
I have it right. Well, I have it that it is the self-respect, the self-worth. I have it that those are all part of the. So there's
Well,
I have it that there's two
he speaks
branches,
of all
and
three in the book. He
really,
says there's
which
self-worth, self-efficacy, and self-respect. And self-respect. Self-worth is sort of the
I'm,
sort of what do you call that? Your essence, the essence of how worthy you are, and self-respect is how people should treat you, and
I
self-efficacy is
think.
how well you can handle reality.
Well, I still think so. I still think self-respect and self-worth come from the same thing. Like if I
Yeah, I
if
would say
I'm
so.
if I don't have self-worth, I'm not gonna. So it's just that self-respect means that you draw boundaries as a
Okay.
result of your self-worth.
Okay. So what if what if victimhood is an easy place to go when you have low self-esteem?
It's a well. That's just a fact. It is the easiest place to go when you have low self-esteem, because
Okay.
then you
Great.
also get comfort. You also get people to go, "Oh, you're beautiful. I
Yeah.
can't believe this happened to you," and then they comfort you. And so the trouble I have with it is that because it's a way to get comfort, and I've seen people connect through horrible things that have happened to them, and I can
Yeah.
tell it's not that they need support, it's that they're looking for connection through their pain, grief,
Hmm.
suffering.
Hmm.
And I have it that that can become an addiction. And so the hardest thing for somebody with low self-esteem to do is to unplug, because if they have low self-esteem, they're already predisposed for codependence. Codependence meaning
Right.
you gain your
Yes.
validity through how other people view you, perceive you, right? Which is just a kind of hell, because if they don't like you, then you're fucked.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. You need other people to take care of you, and
but
your ability to
right.
take care of them is potentially zero, and you can't take care of yourself. So you're
So you make
feeding
all
off of
sorts of
somebody
weird
else.
choices, right?
Yeah.
You make all sorts of weird choices, and choices that ultimately won't serve you in the long run. So
Hmm.
the challenge is just the easiest place to go, which had me so interested in your stages of responsibility,
Right.
because
That's right.
that lowest level just looks like codependence to me. It just looked like, low. It looked like no responsibility. It looked like a place of all blame, and
You mean other
so I
people
want to.
taking care of you, the third level?
Well, first we should. So,
Okay. Yeah. Let's define them.
yeah, I went. So I go one, two, three,
Right.
because I have it. Everybody starts at one,
Yep.
which is you're saying is the third level because you laid them out as one, two, three, right?
Like self-responsibility is the first one. If you can't do self-responsibility, then the next two are gonna suck, because you're already not fully responsible for your own emotions and your own actions and your own words. So you have to start with that in order
You
to
do.
express the other ones, but that's not always
Uh,
available to everyone.
oh, you
um,
were talking about it as a skill and a capacity to actually. This is interesting. So I just look at them. I just map them across the stages of ego development, and
oh,
so
I see. I
And
see.
so for me, like the lowest level of taking virtually no responsibility, that would be
uh,
pre-rational ego. So
right.
that's how I mapped them across when I
is,
first saw it.
is that
So
level
would you
two on
like
Keegan's
let's
level of
so
development?
let's
Okay.
just hear if you could
Yep.
for me for the audience just distinguish
Yeah. All three.
what the yeah all three please.
Okay. For me, the first level, at least in the ways that I declare it, is it's essentially concentric. You start with your own self.
Sure.
You start with self responsibility. That is the most effective thing you can do to engage with reality, the reality that lives around outside of you.
It's required for any healthy
Yep.
relationship, for any
Yep.
to actually do results. It's required.
Yeah, and it's required so that you don't meld with the rest of the world, which also
Right.
because you can't choose what happens outside of yourself. You can choose your own actions, your own words, and
Correct.
you can choose you can choose how you engage with how you feel.
Right.
Or sorry, you can't choose how you feel, but you can choose to take the
No.
feelings and use them as information. The same way that you can't choose how your body how your body feels, but you can do things that will support you in feeling your body feeling good, exercising, eating well, sleeping well. And the same is true for emotions. So emotions and feeling and sensations are just are evolutionary, primal evolutionary
You mean
expressions.
when you say you can't choose how you feel, do you mean emotions?
Yeah, you can't choose the emotions.
Okay,
The
well,
emotions,
we have
the emotion.
we have a
Okay.
point of overlap.
Oh yeah, that's
Just I'll just say disagreement there, but
perfect. Perfect. I love it. Okay, so if you look at it from an evolutionary biology standpoint,
yeah.
your ability to have emotions is part of is essentially the layer of the brain that was created by the previous layer of the brain, which is the mammalian brain. The neocortex
So
is
let's
in
say
service of
let's say out of the box you
yeah,
have no choice around that. Like
yeah,
as a
exactly.
human with no development, sure. I'll give you that.
Well, okay.
I do think you can develop choice, and then
Yes.
event. Okay, okay,
Yes.
great.
Well, you can
Okay, great.
develop choice around what you do with the information
No, no, actually, how you
oh really?
feel. Like
Okay.
yeah. I mean,
We'll
there are
get to that.
things where. Okay, great.
Okay, we'll get to that, and you can totally disagree. Okay, but right now we're going down the leaf, and that's
Yeah,
way
yeah,
too
yeah, yeah,
far.
yeah.
Okay,
So
so
what
first
level
level,
two? What's level? Yeah. So
level
level
one
one.
is being self-responsible. Level two is learning to be responsible for others. Is once you're in a place where you know how you stand and you know your own sense of balance around how you
Okay.
engage with the world, then you can sort of extend out and say, okay, I can support you, I can support you. And then
Okay. Yeah.
when you feel like you can't do it anymore, for a variety of reasons, you're out of resources, physical, emotional, and so on, you can just kind of retreat back, take care of yourself, and then you can go out again.
Yeah.
And then the third level is it's a little bit harder because it's more about being responsible for being vulnerable in a good way, so that other
Wow.
people can
I
support you.
completely misinterpreted your original post.
Yeah.
Like
So the third
massively
level
misinterpreted what
is
you were saying.
yeah, the third level is other people being responsible for you, but in a way that works. That's not codependent.
So can I just tell you how badly I misinterpreted it?
Oh, I mean, yes,
So
absolutely.
I had them flipped, and what you were saying was level three was forcing other people to take care of you and be responsible for you. And I'm like, that's not responsibility at
Oh
all.
no,
And then the
no.
second one was like, sometimes you can you take it, then sometimes other people take care of you, but there's still like, and then the bet like my level three would be, and you take full responsibility for yourself. Period.
Yeah,
You're actually creating a from baseline, you're creating an all above neutral. I love this. I love that I totally misinterpreted it.
yeah.
And
And these
I
were
like
all
what you're
good
saying a lot
levels.
more now. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
no,
get
these
it.
are these. Okay, so this is an approach that is that is out of the shadows. From a sort of more spiritual
Awesome.
standpoint,
Oh
right? It's
man, that's so great.
mature. It's mature. It's what do you call that? It's mature. It's aware and it's secure. Okay, what would be those three levels from that perspective? Now, all of
Awesome.
them can be immature, insecure, and unaware. You can be self-responsible in a way that is completely unaware and immature. Good, and
So
that's
they're
narcissistic,
all healthy. They're all healthy. The ones you laid
right?
out.
Of course,
Got
of course.
it.
But there's unhealthy expressions of them, and it looks different depending on the people. So the more insecure you are, in the anxious direction, the more you express people a sense of codependency. So level three sucks
Yeah,
because you
totally.
can't because you want people to be responsible for you and you can't be responsible for yourself. Your self-responsibility is awful, and as a
Got it.
result your other people being responsible for you is also awful. So people who
So
are anxious tend to
all
need
right. I
more
really like what you've done
self-responsibility,
here.
but an
Yeah.
avoidant person is already really really self-responsible, but they're stuck at supporting others or others supporting them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's it.
Got it. Okay. Clear. Clear. Yeah. So let me just because so I love what you've done, and this is totally different than what I thought you were laying out. I thought because a lot of what you've been doing is talking about just the pathology, this I'll call it psychopathology in our culture right now. So I was assuming you were pointing to that, but you're actually going, hey, look, here's a place, and so I like what you distinguished. So first of all, it's like to be a healthy human, you have to take responsibility for yourself. And then the next stage of being, I'm so good at taking responsibility for myself, I can then extend that care and support to others if I'm developed enough. But if I don't have responsibility for myself first, I can't do that cleanly or in a healthy way.
That's right. Or vice versa. Because if you can't be self-responsible, people can't take care of you in a way that you'll understand how they're trying to save you, and you don't need that.
Right. And you know, if you don't have self-responsibility, other people will be cautious about supporting you anyway, because they're going to feel something unclean about it or something unhealthy about it. So then the third level would be, you know, not only am I so confident I can take care of myself, I can then extend that care and support to other people. But the third level is I know well enough that both of those dynamics are healthy, so I can then allow myself to be cared for, and I can surrender to needing.
Yeah. Yep.
And because it takes a high level of vulnerability and trust.
Yeah. Yep.
And those people have to be really clean to allow yourself to be taken care of.
Yeah, call that healthy vulnerability.
Awesome. I love this. I have no trouble with any of this. I just so rarely see this.
I know.
And well, most people don't even have stage 1.
That's right.
Not emotionally, or like even in a lot of the trouble I have with a lot of masculine and feminine dynamics, and a lot of the work that's out there is like the man is responsible for how the woman feels.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
if it's an agreement, if it's consensual, if it's fully consensual, it can be done as two roles playing out really well. Absolutely. But but it also makes it harder for the man to be in a vulnerable position. But he might actually do that at his men's circle. Super classic. It's been happening for thousands of years, or some version of that.
I also actually think it can stunt a woman's emotional development if
for sure.
If she's constantly in a place of, you know, me needing to care for her, like, and everything is, and I've been in relationships like this where it's like, well, everything's the guy's fault, because if she's upset, he did something wrong. And there's a lot of that out there. And it's like, well, if she doesn't want to have sex with you, then it's because you fucked up. Well, maybe it's because she's engaging in some unhealthy control dynamic.
Yep. That's right.
And you know, eventually they end up either losing the man or turning him into, maybe not sexually, but into, you know, submissive to all of her whimsical nature. And then she ends up being turned off by him anyway. And it leads down a whole hole of pathology, no pun intended.
Right. Yeah. And this happens exactly when somebody is not self-responsible enough.
Right.
When they can't realize that they can't realize their part in creating an unhealthy dynamic. And so it could be said that victimhood is exactly that. If you look at the drama triangle, victims have no responsibility. There's no self-responsibility. And the way they use that non-responsibility is by blaming those who aren't doing the right job.
Yeah. What's funny is I never really got the victim triangle, because people kept explaining it like a triangle, but it's actually a dot. Like there's a top part of the triangle, right? And I wish I had it. There is. So
there's no top. There's victim, the rescuer, and perpetrator, and they all engage with each other. Yeah, but they all need each other. It's a codependency triangle.
Right. Well, there's a baseline, and there's a triangle on top that nobody ever talks about.
Okay, I'm not following that part.
Well, it looks like a diamond. Like it looks like this, and then there's a line in the middle, and everybody talks about the victim triangle, which is on the bottom, because people go around that, and then on the top. Hold on, let me pull it up.
Okay.
I have it somewhere.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
Well, neither had I, and all the people I had they'd only talked about the bottom half.
Yep. Also, one more piece while you're looking for this, if you can split your brain in two, you can look at victimhood as a transpersonal as a transpersonal thing. It's not anyone in particular. It's like a field of experience or a narrative.
Okay.
And the perpetrator is another kind of narrative, and the rescuer is another kind of narrative. And they're perpetually in an epic engagement, and it's never going to go away. You can't make that go away. It's just something that exists, and because some people have it better than others, some people experience reality in a way that they lose choice. Other people fend for themselves and don't mind impacting others. I mean, this particular narrative of the victim triangle is never going to go away. So victimhood could be said to be just that particular narrative that people fall into and get stuck in until they're not anymore. And part of the conversation for me has been, well, how do you get the fuck out of that narrative? How do you support somebody who's in that narrative when they lost choice and they're stuck in a place where they believe in that mindset of having lost the choice? And everything that in that victimhood field that they're in tells them that the only way to get back their choice is to get help from the rescuer and to fight the perpetrator.
I wish I could find it. It was actually an illustration. All I'm finding is the bottom half. So there's a top half.
Yep.
There's a top half. So there's another triangle that's a mirror image, but is all healthy stuff. And when I first saw it, I went, yeah, I've never understood the persecutor rescuer victim, because I don't like, I can certainly occasionally be the persecutor, but I've never been in the other parts of it. And usually it's because I'm so sick of somebody being a victim.
Yep.
But I just,
you also hella disagreeable, so it's going to be hard to put you in a place where people where it's going to be hard for you to go in a place where you don't have a say.
Well, yeah. I mean, did you say I'm very disagreeable?
Yeah. Yeah, as a personality trait.
I'm disagreeable?
Yeah. So you should know about the big five personality traits. There's openness, neuroticism, agreeableness, and I don't remember the other two. But yeah, there's 5 big personality traits that don't correlate to any of the others. Each of them doesn't correlate to the others. So there's like 5 dimensions of personality.
Would you define disagreeable for me in this model?
Okay, disagreeable is some version of it's my way or the highway. And so it's more important that you get your way than playing along with others. And being agreeable is actually, it's more important to play along with others than to have it your way. So one of them tends towards individual choice. The other one tends to go towards collective choice.
All right. I mean, I do offer, I do create agreements all the way. Like, hey, let's do it this way. Shall we do it this way? Because usually if I care, it's because I've thought it out pretty thoroughly. And if they take it on too, then they're, but, all right. Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly like, if I will not sacrifice what I think to be important for any sort of collective anything. Like,
that's it. That's exactly it.
It's also why I haven't had sex since October. Like, I'm just not willing to
sacrifice.
To sell myself out is the way I look at it. So if we want to call that disagreeable, that's fine. I agree.
That's great, but only because you could relate to it.
Oh, well, so here's my general thing. If I think I'm right, I'm like, no. But the minute I see that my perspective lacks something, or if I'm wrong, I immediately acknowledge it. Like, oh, I was totally, like this morning, I thought somebody, I posted a thing about don't get your news from memes, right?
Right, I saw that.
And some guy's like, you're an idiot at the bottom. Now him, I just blocked. Yep. But another guy said something about, now just imagine that you're, a Russian getting paid to do this. And I misread it. I misread it as him saying, I imagine you, Jason, are just a Russian getting paid to do this. And I'm like, what? Now I was like, all right, well, you passed the. Now I reread it and I went, oh my God, I completely misread it, and I think I said, oh, you're from Texas. It must be a Texas thing. Like that you're. So first of all, he's like, do you really believe there aren't Russians? And I went, you know what? I already deleted my comments, my apologies, and all that happened within 90 seconds because I realized I was wrong. And I acknowledge it and I apologize. Like, to me, that's just how you do that. Like, if you're wrong, you just fucking admit it. I don't have any ego wrapped up in being right, but
Right.
when I am right, I usually am. And so, I had a friend. She like, if I'm gonna fight for it, I know, like, and I had and I used to go, well, look, I mean, I don't care if you agree with me or not, and I used to sort of shrug and be soft about it. And you probably remember Issa Isaacs.
Oh yeah,
It's
of course.
like, well, I'd be like, well, I don't think that's what's going on, but I mean, you're welcome to think like, so I'd be like, but I know I'm right. So, and like 3 days later, she'd be like, God damn it, you were right again. Right. And so I was like, look, if I know I'm right, now I'm not trying to be right. I just often am.
Well, so I mean, you could see that as
It's kind
so
of a
in this case.
superpower, like,
Oh,
because I see things that other people, don't see.
yeah.
And so,
Well, that's helpful as well. So intelligence is playing into it,
yeah, yeah.
and so
Like
you're not just stupid and disagreeable. You're actually really smart and disagreeable.
well, and also I've also been like, I was, I hate to use your term gaslight because it's gotten so, and you posted a really interesting thing about, when I say gaslight, I literally mean, I go, that thing happened, and they're like, no, it didn't. Like, that's what I mean. Like the where
Yep.
you start to feel crazy. And so,
Yeah.
like, one of the many reasons I left my ex-wife was because she would do a thing and I'd go, you're doing this. And she'd go, no, I'm not.
Mm.
And she had enough deniability. And so Mark, I had knocked out a wall in my house and had a loft. And Mark was over at my house almost every day. We were, starting our tech staffing company in the year 2000. And he would watch all this happening. And so he finally started asking her, well, Isabel, how else could Jason possibly interpret what you're doing? And she
Mm-hmm.
would never have an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And he would just go, not my life, not my wife. To me,
Mm-hmm.
like digging me every day. Not my life, not my wife. And so by the time I left her 2 years later, I did not trust my perceptions about anything. Like, I got to
Yep.
a place where I was like, and Mark Lewis is one of those people who said, Jason, you've got the most accurate perceptions of anybody I ever met about what people are up to, unless it's a woman you're in love with.
Ha,
And
ha,
then
ha,
all of
classic.
your barometers are all my gauges don't work if I'm in
Yeah,
love with
you're
her.
highly biased.
And I'm usually biased in favor of she's amazing.
Of course.
Like, I don't, and so,
And that happened again recently, right?
well, it's, there's a non-disclosure agreement around that one. So
Yeah, but it is. You don't have to
sure.
go into details.
Yeah, I'll just say yes. And I was I knew early on too
It's
without,
called drugs. It's called the
right,
most natural drugs coming out of your brain to get you
hormones.
high. Hormones. Exactly. And that's
The
it.
most powerful drugs on the planet.
Yeah. And I mean, and I suspect it happens not just with partners, but it happens in group, and that explains groupthink.
And group trances and group,
That's
it
right.
explains cults to some degree, like the way they
Yeah.
flow together, like it
Yeah.
triggers all the brain chemistry.
Yeah. So it
So,
could be said again, go back to victimhood, because I like to keep the thread going. Is victimhood could be a form of groupthink. And if you get enough people who are victims or rescuers, which is another face of victim, playing into that field because they're essentially stuck in it. Yes, I see your finger.
I'm going to tie off the disagreeable thing. So,
Okay.
and I'm not
Oh,
disputing it. What I
perfect.
am saying is, it took me so long to trust my perceptions again,
Mm-hmm.
which are almost always accurate, that I'm
Yep.
absolutely unwilling to. And I've had too many experiences where I'm like, I know in a relationship we should have this agreement because this works, and I've
Yep.
been like, well, and like, all right, well, I'll just hold off on that, and so I'm just really clear about what works and what doesn't work for me. and I'm unwilling to, but it also like trusting my perceptions again was really hard won. And after being gaslighted for 2 years by my wife,
Yeah.
I'm not giving that one up.
It's happened with your dad too, right?
Uh,
So I didn't mean to say right as in like, it's just, it's been my experience through your story. So I don't want to confirm that by saying right and trying to influence you to say the same thing.
well, it was so no. I don't have a trouble. I don't have trouble with that. Whenever somebody says that, I just go, "Is that?" I think you're saying, "Is that accurate?" Is what I.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
So, did my dad gaslight me? He did in that he like I didn't remember my mother, so he said a bunch of weird things about my mother, but he never gaslighted me. I just never knew he was incredibly volatile, so I never knew if he was gonna like he threatened. He said I was trying to kill him one time because I didn't drain the meat enough. I was 8, by the way, cooking,
Right.
and he was like, "Oh, you know I have stomach troubles. You're trying to kill me," and so he and he was a black belt, so he chased me around the house for an hour and said I was, accused me of trying to kill him with greasy meat. So it wasn't so much that it was like he never was like that didn't happen. I mean, he did to his friend when I wrote him the letter.
Mm-hmm.
He never said that. He never said it to me. He never said none of
Yeah.
that stuff happened. In a way, he gaslighted himself by he was in denial.
Right.
Which later, like the reason to unwaveringly look at yourself in the mirror, and I mean, I have it. That's why he blew his brains out.
Yeah. You
28
couldn't hold
years
it
ago.
together.
Because he was in denial about the way he abused people for so long. He, when it finally came, like because he hit his third wife, and she said, "Do you realize what you've done?" And that's when he, like, I have it just all went.
Yeah.
And
It all
so he
came
went and blew his
together.
brains out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my theory, but it's just a theory.
Yeah,
I
it's
wasn't
interesting.
there.
Everyone who's had like not everyone, so it's many people, including clients that I've spoken to, that has very difficult childhood. It often looks very similar. It looks like the person's doing some version of horrible things, and then they either deny it to themselves, they deny it to their partner, they deny
Right.
it to their children, but it's happening. And so the children end up having this sort of weird experience of not being able to trust their own reality.
By the way, because of my childhood, I just want to own this. It's one of the reasons I have very little tolerance or compassion for people who play the victim card
Mm-hmm.
or victimhood, because I'm like, look, I could like, I didn't even like, my father taught me to shoplift when I was 8. I didn't blame him when I eventually went to prison at 19.
Mm-hmm.
I went, my choices got me here.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yep.
and I repeated that. I was 19 years old, and I went, you know what? I'm the one who chose to steal the cars off the car lots.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. Sure, he taught me to shoplift when I was 8, but I didn't go, well, that's because of my dad that I stole this car. Like I was 19 years old. I was an adult. I made those choices.
Yep.
So
Yep.
there's just no power there. For people to like, I could easily blame him for a lot of things, but there's no why. There's no power there.
What is that? Yeah,
For me, there's no choice. There's no choice.
Well,
There's force.
you can't become self-responsible by blaming others.
Right.
And
All right.
and
Now,
so that responsibility
thank you
never
for saying
arises
that.
otherwise.
Yeah. Right. Good. So back to
But
victimhood. What if
the
it's a group
gaslight.
trance or?
Well, what if it's a group trance that
Where were we?
that keeps people there, and in that trance, your dad could be in that trance too, right? He because he couldn't admit to himself that he was responsible for these things, right? So it's the group trance that prevents people from acknowledging their choices in whatever ways they were so people make choices one way or the other. Sometimes they make choices with a great degree of sovereignty. Even sometimes they make choices with a low degree of sovereignty because they have low self-esteem, because they don't know any better, because they make choices before they're ready or they're willing, and they're influenced by others. So low sovereignty choices is low self-responsible choices. but you can't blame that on yourself. You can just look forward and say, okay, well, those were bad choices. Now I can make better choices. I can learn
Right.
from those bad choices.
Right.
And so victimhood is sort of the refusal, the bypassing of the possibility of being fully acknowledging that you have a choice moving forward because you're stuck on what happened before.
There's nothing useful in the blame thing anyway. Like let's pretend that you and I are on a desert island and we've got 10 50-gallon barrels of fresh water.
Yeah.
And we got a bunch of salt water all around us, but we got 10, 50, and then like we wake up in the morning and all of the barrels are smashed.
Yeah.
And we go, who left them this close to the rocks?
Mm-hmm.
Does that help us drink any fucking water that's fresh? No. Who cares? Who gives a shit who left them that close to the rocks and didn't know the tides? Or like, do we even, like in a survival situation, do we even have time to bicker about whose fucking fault it was or who fell asleep during watch? Or no, we need to find some fucking fresh water. And so that's the way I look at it. Like to me, that just really brings it to light. Like this whole, like, whose fault is it thing? Yeah. It's not moving it forward at all. It's not helping us drink fresh water and we're all thirsty.
Mm-hmm.
So
here's the question. How do you get people who are stuck in that particular trance and get them out of it?
Well, are you ready for this?
Yeah, I actually posted about that, and I said, how do you support people who don't have a choice? Do you push them against their limited view, against their consent?
I have it. It's far more difficult for somebody, at low levels of self-esteem, or in a victim to take responsibility. It's really hard for them, and
that's right.
The very thing you have to do is almost force them to. If you don't force them to, you just go, well, how are you responsible? Mm-hmm. And if they don't want to answer that question, I don't need to be around them.
Right. Okay. So you self-select out of that process,
absolutely.
which is great.
But I also only, like, when I work with people, they understand that they have to take responsibility for all their choices. And I educate them on what results that produce. Like, nobody comes to me who's in that space. As a as a guide.
Yeah, for sure. And you require some level of development or some level of sovereignty to even engage with them.
Yeah, right? I'm never, like, they look at my site, they know that I'm not their first, like, if they've never done any personal development, I'm not the guy.
Yeah, and you can look at every single person as moving through a trajectory of self-responsibility. Yeah. I mean, they start out with their life with no responsibility because they can't and don't even know they exist. And then slowly they move forward through these ego development stages towards greater self-responsibility, which then can translate into helping others and having others help them.
We're all fully dependent on our mother's milk or some version of it. When we're younger, like there's no getting away from that. But my conversations inherently begin at what I would consider an adult who I would hope is sovereign and responsible for themselves. But we're never all like we all. And I should say, yes, my life is the sum total of my choices. We've all needed help, though, some more than others at some points, and sometimes I wait for too long to ask for help because I have trust issues. And I'm never sure if it's going to be clean, like I still have some.
Well, you can pretty much assume and it's never going to be clean the whole time. And you can pretty much know for sure and trust, not only trust in how messy things are going to get at some point or another, but you can also trust that you're going to be engaging in other people's shadows, which is their lack of maturity, awareness, and insecurity. That's bound to happen. Anyone you engage with, no matter what the boundaries you set around this. I mean, and it's been happening forever, right? Like you have some friends that are fully self-responsible. Mark Lewis, is clearly one of them.
Most are. I mean,
if that is still around. Yeah, that's right. Partnership is a little bit different because it's very difficult to find partnership where some level of reparenting is not going to happen.
Well, okay, sure, yeah, I agree with that completely. Here's the fucked up part too, and this is where I could see the point of the author, um,
Of
who
what?
said that of the article, who said that taking responsibility could be toxic spirituality. When I
Oh
was
yeah.
in
Yeah.
relationship with a woman who took the least amount of responsibility for, and here's why. She always felt that if she took responsibility, and this wasn't from me, this is from previous relationships, that if she took responsibility, and this is a real danger, by the way,
Mhm.
that people would then like attack her for that thing she would call it an admission, not taking
Mhm.
responsibility, but like I like that you were admitting a thing, and then people
Yeah.
would use it as leverage against her in
Oh
previous
yeah.
relationships. So
Yeah.
getting her to take responsibility was, and she was constantly in fear. And in over 4 years, I never did it to her, but she would never take it, and I was always very quick to take responsibility. So I ended up feeling depleted, resentful, because but I was so madly in love with her that I sold myself out in lots of ways by going, okay, I'm going to take responsibility here because I can. This will move us forward. We'll get back into connection. And so
Mhm.
it started to become a very unbalanced, very toxic dynamic for myself. And I started rather than taking responsibility, expanding me, which it often did, I felt it starting to whittle away at me.
Yeah.
And so I was, before I left, I was like, I've lost like who I was, I had lost so much of myself and had become such a shell of my former self. I had to go. So that's where taking responsibility can become toxic.
Yep.
Um, and and I'd rather be single than
Yeah, this was a
and
toxic version of level two that of the
sure,
taking care of somebody
right,
else in a way that's
right,
codependent.
right, right. And I wanted to, like, I loved her so much, and
Yep.
and could see her vulnerability and her, but and here's the thing that I'll go back to. I knew within 3 weeks of dating her that it was not a fit, and I went nah because I was so deluded about how
Yep.
amazing she was.
Yeah.
And here was the key phrase. I said, "Oh my God!" And she was bar none the most beautiful and most brilliant woman I'd ever met in my life, and maybe I mean she's just extraordinary in so many ways. Um, and like ethically around business, we were the same, and we just like we were incredible together in lots of ways, and also while the sex was on my scale very vanilla, the energetic connection while we were making love was just epic. Like the like
Mhm.
I would have you know like
You're
my both of us would have
you're
orgasms that were just
addicted. I know.
there. Yeah, there was, sure, yeah. um and But 3 weeks in, I said, you're the woman I've always wanted, but thought I could never find. And she said, you're the man I always wanted to have, but I always wanted, but thought I could never have. And I went,
Hmm.
"Hmm?" like, that sounds like a massive self-esteem issue. Nah, that's
Yeah.
impossible. I love her too. No, she's amazing. Of course, how could she possibly think she could never have a guy like me?
Hmm.
But it was like she had it. She was, average. Like her whole thing was she's super average. And I don't know anybody who thought she was average, but she had it in her head that she was
Yep.
average and that she could never have a guy like me, whatever that meant to her.
Hmm.
And I ignored that.
That's our shadows, and you just batted it
3 weeks
aside because you're
in,
addicted.
3 weeks in, sure. 3 weeks in, I'm very agreeable to that. Three
Yeah.
3 weeks in,
Oh yeah.
three three week 3 weeks in.
Yeah.
By the way, that's why I asked you to define it, because I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know what he's talking about. I'm totally agreeable if they're right. Like I
Yeah.
don't resist somebody, But yeah, it was clearly an addiction. It was the only addictive relationship I've ever been in. It was the only one with so much conflict. I mean, the number of times, I just had to start ignoring her when she broke up with me, and then
Yeah.
we like I would just pretend like she hadn't, and it would be fine.
Yeah.
So, but I knew then, and I should have just trusted myself. I should have been like,
Yeah.
that's a massive self-esteem issue that I don't want to overcome, and that's going to take way too much work. And she's not ready for a partner. Like she's not the kind of partner I want. But I ignored all that at my peril.
Hmm. So I'm going to speak to that a little bit because
Yeah.
I've mentioned the addiction thing a couple of times. So
Yeah.
I want to bring that back to the whole layers of the brain. Uh, in my inner world model of the world and reality as it is right now, and the biological model that I believe is in existence right now is that we grow new layers of the brain to actually become more adaptive. So we evolve new layers of the brain. So, the reptilian brain evolved the mammalian brain, which then evolved the neocortex and so on.
Triune brain, I'm familiar. You
Yeah.
got it.
Okay. So whatever happens at lower levels of the brain is stuff that's below our consciousness level. We can see the effects of it, but it's moving us. And of course, once we see it's moving us, we can do something about it so it doesn't move us the same way, but it's still below the consciousness level. And it's moving us in ways that we can't even begin to understand because we can't. We don't have a handle on it. It's much like memories before the part of our brain that starts to record things in chronological order. These things have happened to us. We have the somatic memories of it, but we don't have a handle on how to find it inside of ourselves. That's why new techniques like TRE is helping reconnect with those very. What is the okay? But I don't remember the exact what
look
it means.
I'll look it up.
You can look it up, but basically it's about doing movements and shaking that actually reconnects you with trauma, and it's powerful because it's somatic. It's deep somatic work where you don't have to think your way into what happened. But you'll remember it without those handles, without needing those handles by doing the shaking.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not a practitioner, but just to give you a sense. Okay, so. What led you to make those choices that you can acknowledge you made are things that moved you from below the consciousness level and below your ability to fully handle. So you can look back and say, I made this choice. 3 weeks later, I said, nah, it's fine, or some version of that, which is an expression of you being addicted and moving anyway in a direction that at some level, some part of your brain was like, maybe not.
At least mildly delusional.
That's right. Yeah, and that's the power.
Maybe not addicted yet. I was definitely addicted later, but that at that point it was just delusion.
I mean, whatever it is, there was stuff moving you beyond your ability to make a fully conscious choice about it, or even to say, I understand this person is likely fucked up in some way, and I'm going to get all the resources I need in order to engage with this person in the best possible way. That didn't even occur.
I prefer has some healing to do versus fucked up, but
yeah, I mean, I call that shadows and messiness, whether it's on the table. It's shadows if it's not on the table. It's just messy if it's on the table, right? It's if the person. But it's a trajectory too. Like there's whatever's whatever's messy kind of grows over time as you understand what's been hiding all along. Sure. And that plays into your own versions of that too. Right. So, but just to bring it back to victimhood, I think this victimhood, in a way, victimhood is sort of a stance, it's an adaptive stance it's an adaptive response to having lost choice and trying to regain it, or trying not to lose even more choice. And so, I think
it's also an attempt at being loved.
Yeah, well, that's adaptive too, right? So it's like what's the best thing I can do from this place of I feel like my legs got chopped off. Okay, well, getting people to love me and support me and hold me up because I don't think I can walk. I mean, at a psychological level, it makes sense. It's more adaptive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's more adaptive to actually try to kill all the perpetrators at a very low level, primal level. It's more adaptive to do that than just sitting there with your legs cut off and fading away.
I just think people, so first of all, for people who don't love themselves, which is one way to look at low self-esteem,
yep.
It's as you were saying, it's a very easy place to go. I don't think they
Yep.
realize how little they hobble their own development in terms of getting to a place where they love themselves and accept themselves, and in a way don't need, but are deeply, just because they don't need. So I'm about to say a thing that people are going to get, not that that hasn't happened already by both of us, but um, uh, it hobbles their progress towards getting to a place where they can
Yep.
fully love themselves and be responsible for themselves. And that
Yep.
doesn't mean that they don't, we want them to get to a place where they don't need other people's love. Well, actually need, yes, but deeply nourished by still, of
Yep.
course. Like, I can't wait to be in love again, and and to have deep connection with somebody that's fully open and fully vulnerable. And
Yep.
I'm also cautious about who I choose to allow into that space, because for lots of reasons. But I don't think that people understand when they set the victimhood up thing, they're actually in the long term doing more harm than good, both for
Yeah.
themselves
So,
and for us culturally.
right. Well, if that's how they feel like they have available, then until they have a sense that there's more available than that, and it makes sense to them, then that's all they got. Right? It's like they're
Also,
stuck in a little hole.
and there's so much to give up to be fully self-responsible. There's a lot to give up
Hmm.
that can be very addictive for people.
Yeah.
Um, there's Desiree used to talk about how she thought I was. Uh, she felt I was too accepting of my father. Now I routinely say he was a monster in most areas, but there's two areas where he was really great, and I
Hmm.
go on to explain those areas. And she had it that was just, she's like, well, but all the physical abuse and the emotional abuse. And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, I said he was a monster. I wasn't saying like, let's model everything he did. And
Yeah.
even in the areas he was good, but he had me read In Search of Excellence when I was 12.
What's that?
And he had me read In Search of Excellence when I was 12,
Oh, got it.
which is like the first, management personal development book ever. It was like, by Waterman and Peters, The In Search of Excellence. It was like 1982 or something that came out. It's like one of the first nonfiction books for individuals in companies, and
Mm.
how to create cultural change, and big thick book, right? And he tested me on it.
Ah,
And he, like, I mean, most people know this. He sat me down when I was 8 years old and explained to me the clitoris and how to find the G spot. And I think I was the only third grader who knew the word perineum. I think it's a little young, you know, but I'm grateful. And he also said, just always make sure the woman comes first. You'll never have to worry about your own pleasure. Really straightforward. He taught me about consent at the age of 8. He's like, never have a woman, never like, if she doesn't want to do a thing, fine, find another woman. It's not a big deal. Don't ever force a woman to do anything she doesn't want to do.
mhm.
So it's a very, it was 1978, so it wasn't exactly an advanced conversation around consent, but it was pretty, for
Pretty early.
1990, yeah, for 1978, it was pretty awesome. And how to find the G spot. I mean, in 1978, I saw an article. I saw a headline on the cover of a magazine that said, "Is the Grafenberg spot even real, or is it a myth?" And that's what the G spot's named after, is Dr. Grafenberg.
Hmm.
So I to have that advanced education, and it was all book and conversational. There was no, he didn't like bring in a woman to have it.
Right.
I
Right.
was a virgin until I was almost 18. But
Hmm.
but to have that kind of knowledge, imparted onto me, and to have a consent conversation, and to grow up in a shame-free sexual environment. He said, if you like men, that's fine. If you like women, that's fine. All orientations are fine. 1978, that was really rare.
Mm.
So to say that because he, was verbally abusive to me, and that we then throw out the rest of that, no, no, no. I have it. I just said I'm not revising anything. And he was deeply tortured, tortured soul, and he killed himself. So whatever, he
Yeah.
handled it, for us. But I just have it. It's actually a balanced view of him, and we can't throw out the good, as a result of the bad. I don't even know why I got on that thread, but well, anyway, to bring it back to victimhood, I could easily go into a bunch of victimhood around my upbringing, or my but I'm not going to because there's no power there. Now, how do we
Yeah.
get people to take responsibility? Like, how do we get them to a place where they realize that's a choice and that it
Mhm.
benefits them more than not?
Well, it's a
I
choice
don't fucking
between
know.
it's a
I just avoid those.
but
I just avoid those people.
that's the point. That's the point I wanted to get to. It took us an hour and 12 minutes because that's the point where I'm at. Okay, so people feel like they gain something out of being a victim,
Of course.
but there's also something to be gained out of not being a victim. And how do you make one choice versus another? On the long run, where's that going to get you? But if you're in a place of victimhood, then you're already in a place of survival. So
Well,
you
there's
want the
that.
thing that's going to help the fastest, not the slowest.
Here's the thing, though. You have to realize that loving yourself is far more nourishing long term and far more powerful in your life
That's right.
than the comfort and love of others in the space of
Well,
victimhood. Hold
right,
on. In the
right.
space of victimhood, that kind of love is what I mean.
Yeah.
And
Codependent love.
so, yeah. And because codependent love is fundamentally an addiction, that's why there's 12-step programs around codependence. Like,
Yeah.
how do you talk to somebody like that? Like, around like essentially being autonomous and sovereign first when they've got so much. So that's the whole, like, your 3 levels of responsibility. There's probably 3 levels of dependency below it.
Mm-hmm.
And getting people, they have to move through those 3 first to get to, baseline.
Mm-hmm.
And I just avoid to be honest, I just avoid them. But
Yep.
what I'm watching, it's almost like I'm fiddling while Rome is burning in a way, which doesn't make me look very good. But I'm watching all this shit go on in our society. You're taking
Yeah.
it on, which I'm impressed by. But I'm like, I just don't want to deal with those people.
My own entertainment and education.
And they're taking on, they're creating an incredible amount of psychopathology. I see very few voices like yours out there going, "Hey, this is creating bad things," and I'm like, and a lot of people are just turning a blind eye, not because they're, it's not very judgmental, not because they don't see what's wrong. They just go, and they're not taking it seriously. But the victimhood thing is almost a movement at this point.
Oh yeah.
Like,
So let me bring in something that's interesting. So I wrote a post about gaslighting and around no, was it gaslighting? Yeah. No, it was about it was about shadow work and self responsibility. Okay. So one person said, "Well, there's a slippery slope. I can't take responsibility for what my dad did to me. And if you tell me to
you
do
don't have
that,
to.
no, I know, but hang on. I'm not talking about what they have to do. What I'm talking about is what leads them to say something like that. What leads them to
I don't know.
misunderstand
I
my
don't know. I'm
call?
thoroughly
But
confused.
that's a real good question. And that's the reason we're talking about this whole victimhood thing is that the mindset that happens when you're a victim, in my experience, in my perspective, having kind of launched that is so many
They
times.
just misinterpret what responsibility even means. It sounds like.
That's right. That's
Jesus
right.
Christ, man.
And so you can't have a conversation around responsibility with a victim because it doesn't make sense. And so this whole journey for me started
Nah.
when I said something like all my friends who are victims and are not victims anymore went through a journey of self-responsibility, right? And this person says, "Oh, you're victim blaming," and I was like, "I don't
Well,
think
that's
so,
just
but let me look into that." But that's the response of a victim, right?
all right. So
You're
let's.
blaming the victim.
So I do have a solution.
Okay.
If we want one. So
Curious.
I have had that conversation with somebody,
Mm-hmm.
and I distinguished between blame and responsibility in it. Now, to be fair, she was already a client of mine.
Mm-hmm.
She was already autonomous. She worked at Genentech. She, had already been about halfway through my personal evolution program. So all that in place. Now I had laid out for her there between blame and responsibility and choice and how to deal with anger, which anger requires blame. and blame and responsibility have trouble coexisting. So this stuff that you probably heard from me like 15 years ago or something, or 12 years ago, right? So this woman came in and she had been hit by her boyfriend.
Right.
And I said, all right, well, first of all, and by the way, I don't know what their dynamic was. I later found out he was a meth addict, so he could have just been coming down off of something. But, it's always tricky because you never know what was said, how it escalated, right?
Yep.
Now, I said, well, remember that lesson from last week? It's like, how are you responsible? And she looked at me like she wanted to kill me. And I said, no. So first of all, it is not your fault. There is no
Right.
excuse for physical violence in a relationship. It's not your fault. There's no way you are to blame. But how are you responsible? And she looked confused. And I said, when did you know he would eventually hit you? And she said, well, 6 months ago, he threw a phone and smashed it. And then 2 months later, he threw a cordless phone in her general direction. And then like 4 weeks before this happened, he punched a wall right next to her head. There was levels of increasing violence and then she stayed with him, right? And so I said, so how are you responsible? And she said, I didn't trust my intuition. I said, bingo. What can you learn? And she said, well, I learned to trust myself. So that's what she got out of it, but she wasn't in victim. But I did have to like guide her, and that took an hour, by the way, that conversation.
Yeah.
I had to assure her, and by the way, first I made sure she filed a restraining order against him. She kicked him out of the house, and they were done. So that I made sure that was handled first. And I said, now that we got all that, how are you responsible? And how she was responsible, she ignored an ever-increasing level of violence near her, and then towards her, and then finally on her.
Okay. Yep. I want to say something about that, but I want to let you finish your thought.
Well, that's pretty much it. Like that's the
okay.
and she, and she was already engaged in this endeavor of personal evolution. Yep. So, and I had already laid out the distinctions around taking responsibility a couple of weeks before this event occurred. So those seeds were already laid, but that I did want to distinguish between victim and victimhood, and victim blaming. Like she was not to blame, and I made sure, like, all right, that dude is out of your life, right? She said, yeah. Filed a restraining order, kicked him out, called the cops. I'm like, great, awesome.
Okay, so the process, as I heard you speak it, is she went from blaming she went from some version of I'm just going to speak it and then you can correct. Like she was either blaming herself or she was blaming him, and then you said something like it's not your fault, or or it could be some version of you didn't deserve that, not necessarily you did that.
And I also condemned the behavior, like there's no excuse for violence in a relationship ever.
Right. And then you went to supporting her and trusting her intuition as a form of recovery.
Right.
Which then brings
asking her how is she responsible and what can she learn. And to me, those are the two questions that, they build self-esteem. How are you responsible and what can you learn?
Right.
But it has to be something positive or empowering about yourself or about the world. So in a lot of spaces like this, a woman will say, well, I learned not to trust men, or I learned that men are violent. No, that's not you could learn that. Yeah. It's not very useful for you.
Yep. Yeah. Well, that's usually still that's going back into the blame, right? It's their fault. I can't trust them.
There's just no power for her there. There's no power. There is force, but there's no power.
It occurs to me that there's a piece here around self-worth, around what you deserve, and when somebody does things that is deeply impactful or non-consensual, then it can lower your self-esteem, or it can give you a sense that what you deserve is what happened to you. Right. And part of dispelling this mindset or this trance that you're in is for somebody to say you didn't deserve that. It's not your fault. It was wrong. right? You're
Right.
kind of starting to dismiss
Yeah.
that.
No matter
And
no matter what
yeah,
she did, him hitting
yeah,
her is not okay. No matter what. I
right.
don't care what she did.
Right. And so then you start to say, okay, all that stuff, that's a trance. You didn't deserve that. And you start to support her into learning to trust her intuition around
Right.
what's right and what's wrong. And it's
For
especially difficult.
for the purpose of increasing her self-esteem even more.
That's right. Of course, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because then you go back as you learn and you do all the right things that as such as trusting your intuition around what's right and what's wrong,
Right. Right.
because your compass was off until that point.
Right.
You start to increase your self-esteem, and you start to realize what you really do deserve.
And to be fair, my work is almost impossible for people who are of a codependent level of development
Yeah.
to, I guess it's just hell for them. So
Yeah.
anyway,
then
I actually
yeah.
have to go.
Okay, perfect. Well, this is a really good point, because what we just described
Yeah.
is a process that I'm going through with one of my clients right now, which is and it's my whole approach on sovereignty. It's like, okay, well, you didn't have a choice, and now you want to learn how to make better choice for yourself. What is that going to look like, and what's standing in the way? And in this case, it's a faulty compass.
All right. So, of course, people can reach me. Thank you for this evolutionary conversation. People can reach me at evolutionarycompanies.com. They can reach Philippe at exquisitelover.com or exquisite love.
No, I've updated exquisitedark.love.
Exquisitedark.love. I love it. Cool, man. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to have conversations with you.
Yeah, that was great. I feel like things locked into place in a way that hadn't before. This was really useful.
Good. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, man. I'll talk to you
You're welcome.
soon.
All right. You take care.